The 1960s was a wild time for snack foods, with companies experimenting with flavors, textures, and marketing that would never fly today. Some snacks became legendary, while others vanished without a trace. Whether you remember eating them after school or begging your mom to buy them, 1960s snacks were unlike anything we have now. Here are 20 weird facts about these quirky treats that will transport you back to your childhood. Tang wasn't really made for astronauts. If you grew up in the 1960s, you probably believed that Tang was specifically created for the space program. After all, that's what all the advertising told you. The truth is actually quite different and a lot less exciting. General Foods developed Tang in 1957, a full 4 years before the first American went into space. It was initially marketed as a breakfast drink for regular families, and the sales were pretty lackluster. Nobody seemed particularly interested in powdered orange drink mix when they could just buy actual orange juice. But then NASA decided to include Tang on the Gemini missions in 1965, and General Foods seized the opportunity for the greatest marketing campaign imaginable. Suddenly, Tang wasn't just a drink, it was the official beverage of astronauts. The company plastered astronauts all over their packaging and advertising, and sales absolutely exploded. Kids across America begged their parents to buy Tang so they could drink just like John Glenn, even though Glenn himself later admitted he wasn't a huge fan of the stuff. The funny thing is that NASA chose Tang not because it was special, but because it was convenient. The powdered format saved space and weight, and it helped mask the metallic taste of the water in the spacecraft's recycling system. It wasn't gourmet space food, it was a practical solution to a technical problem. But that didn't stop millions of kids from stirring orange Tang into glasses of water every morning, imagining they were preparing for a mission to the moon. The marketing genius of associating Tang with the space program turned a failing product into an iconic symbol of the 1960s. Pop-Tarts were almost called something else. When Kellogg's introduced Pop-Tarts in 1964, they revolutionized breakfast forever. But you might not know that the name Pop-Tarts wasn't the original plan at all. During development, the product was actually called Fruit Scones, which sounds absolutely nothing like the fun, exciting product that became a cultural phenomenon. Can you imagine asking your mom for fruit scones instead of Pop-Tarts? It just doesn't have the same ring to it. The story behind the name change is actually tied to the pop art movement that was sweeping through American culture at the time. Artists like Andy Warhol were making waves with their bold, colorful, and accessible art that celebrated popular culture and consumerism. Someone at Kellogg's was smart enough to realize that connecting their new breakfast pastry to this trendy art movement could be marketing gold. So Fruit Scones became Pop-Tarts, a name that captured both the popping action of the toaster and the artistic zeitgeist of the era. The original Pop-Tarts came in just 4 flavors: strawberry, blueberry, brown sugar cinnamon, and apple currant. And here's something that might surprise you. The original Pop-Tarts didn't have any frosting on them at all. That's right, kids in 1964 were eating plain, unfrosted Pop-Tarts because that's all that existed. The frosted varieties didn't arrive until 1967, 3 years after the product launched. When you think about it, the idea of a plain Pop-Tart seems almost sacrilegious now, but back then nobody knew any different. The pastries were still a huge hit. Even without all that sugary frosting that would become their signature, Kellogg's couldn't keep them on the shelves, and other companies rushed to create their own versions. Doritos were born at Disneyland. Doritos are one of the most popular snack chips in America, but their origin story is straight out of Disneyland. In the early 1960s, there was a Mexican restaurant called Casa de Fritos, operating at Disneyland, right there in the park. The restaurant was actually a tie-in with the Fritos corn chip brand, and they served traditional Mexican food to hungry park visitors. One day, a salesman from Alex Foods, the company that supplied tortillas to the restaurant, noticed that Casa de Fritos was throwing away stale tortillas at the end of each day. Being a clever businessman, he suggested that instead of wasting the tortillas, they should cut them up, fry them, and season them to sell as chips. The restaurant tried it, and the chips were an instant hit with Disneyland guests. Word eventually got back to Frito-Lay executives, and they decided to develop the concept into a national product. In 1964, Doritos were released to the general public, but here's the weird part. The original Doritos were completely plain. No cheese flavor, no spices, nothing. They were just fried tortilla chips with a little bit of salt. It took until 1972 for Frito-Lay to introduce nacho cheese Doritos, the flavor that would become synonymous with the brand. So, for 8 years, people were buying plain Doritos, which seems almost unimaginable today when there are dozens of flavors to choose from. But those plain Doritos from Disneyland proved that sometimes the simplest ideas can become the biggest successes. The next time you tear open a bag of Doritos, remember that you're eating a snack that was literally born in the happiest place on earth. The Pringles designer also made burial urns. Pringles didn't technically hit the market until 1968, right at the end of the decade. But the story behind their creation is too weird not to include. The man who designed the Pringles can was named Frederick Bohr, and he was a chemist and food storage technician at Procter & Gamble. Bohr was obsessed with creating the perfect chip container, something that would protect chips from breaking and keep them fresh longer than the bags that were standard at the time. After years of development, he came up with the distinctive cylindrical can with the saddle-shaped chip stacked inside. The whole system was ingenious because the uniform shape of the chips meant they could be stacked efficiently, and the can protected them from crushing during shipping and handling. But here's where things get really strange. Frederick Bohr was so proud of his Pringles can design that when he died in 2008, his children honored his final wishes by burying part of his cremated remains in a Pringles can. Yes, you read that right. The man who designed the Pringles can was buried in one. Bohr's children actually stopped at Walgreens on the way to the funeral home to buy a can of Pringles to use as an urn for part of their father's ashes. The family debated which flavor to buy before settling on original. It's both touching and bizarre that a man's proudest professional achievement became his final resting place. The Pringles can represented everything Bauer believed in: functional design, innovation, and solving everyday problems with creative solutions. Kids in the 1960s who first saw those strange cylindrical cans on store shelves had no idea they were looking at a container that would one day serve as its creator's urn. Fact 5. Bugles were sold as finger hats. When General Mills introduced Bugles in 1964, they could have marketed them as just another snack chip, but instead, they leaned into what every kid was already doing with them: sticking them on their fingers. If you ate Bugles in the 1960s, you definitely put them on your fingertips and pretended you had witch fingers or fancy long nails. It was practically a law of childhood. General Mills knew this was happening and actually encouraged it in their advertising campaigns. The commercials and print ads literally showed kids wearing Bugles on their fingers, calling them finger hats, and making it part of the official way to enjoy the snack. Can you imagine a major food company today telling children to play with their food? It would cause an uproar from parents everywhere. But in the 1960s, it was perfectly acceptable marketing strategy, and it worked brilliantly. The cone shape of Bugles wasn't accidental either. General Mills food scientists specifically designed them that way, so they would fit on fingers while also providing an interesting texture and crunch. The unique shape also meant they held seasoning better than flat chips. Originally, Bugles came in just one flavor, but the shape made them perfect for experimentation. Kids didn't just eat Bugles, they played with them first, which made snack time more interactive and fun. The finger hat phenomenon became so associated with Bugles that generations of children have grown up putting them on their fingers before eating them. It's one of those shared experiences that bonds people who grew up in different decades. General Mills created more than just a snack. They created a ritual. And unlike most 1960s snacks, bugles are still around today, and kids are still putting them on their fingers. Lucky Charms. Marshmallows had bizarre original names. Lucky Charms hit store shelves in 1964. And while the cereal itself was revolutionary for including marshmallows in the mix, the names of those original marshmallows were absolutely bizarre. Today we know them as stars, hearts, moons, and clovers. But General Mills didn't call them by those simple names. Instead, they gave them weird, almost mystical sounding names that have been largely forgotten. The pink hearts were called Pink Hearts, which was straightforward enough. But the yellow moons were officially named Yellow Moons. The orange stars were Orange Stars, and the green clovers were Green Clovers. Okay, so maybe those weren't that weird after all. But here's the thing. General Mills marketed these marshmallows as magical charms that granted powers to whoever ate them. Each marshmallow shape supposedly gave kids different abilities throughout their day. It was all part of the Lucky the Leprechaun mythology that the company built around the cereal. What's really weird is that in 1964, there were only 4 marshmallow shapes in Lucky Charms. Just 4. Today's boxes have 8 different shapes, and over the years, General Mills has introduced and retired dozens of marshmallow varieties. But those original 4 were considered revolutionary because no cereal had ever included marshmallows before. General Mills took a huge gamble that parents would buy a cereal that was basically candy mixed with oats. The gamble paid off spectacularly, and Lucky Charms became one of the most successful cereals ever made. Kids in the 1960s would dump the oat pieces out and just eat the marshmallows, which drove parents crazy but made children very happy. The marshmallow to cereal ratio was much lower back then too, which made finding those colorful shapes even more exciting. Space food sticks were actual astronaut food. Unlike Tang, which was adopted by astronauts after the fact, space food sticks were actually developed specifically for the space program and then marketed to the public. Pillsbury created these chewy, cube-shaped snacks in 1969 as a legitimate food source for astronauts. They were designed to be nutritionally complete, non-crumbling, and easy to eat in zero gravity. NASA tested them extensively and actually used them on space missions. Then Pillsbury had the brilliant idea to sell the exact same product to regular Earthbound consumers, and kids went absolutely crazy for them. Space food sticks came in flavors like chocolate, peanut butter, caramel, and mint. And they were packaged in foil wrappers that looked futuristic and space-aged. The advertising campaign emphasized that these weren't just space-themed snacks. They were the real deal. If you ate a space food stick, you were eating the same food that astronauts ate in space. The texture of space food sticks was unique and kind of strange. They were chewy and dense, almost like a very compressed energy bar, but with a softer consistency. Some kids loved them, while others thought they tasted like eating a candle. But the appeal wasn't really about the taste, it was about the connection to the space program. During the height of the Apollo missions, anything associated with astronauts was automatically cool, and space food sticks rode that wave of enthusiasm. The sticks were also marketed as a quick breakfast or snack that provided complete nutrition, which made them appealing to busy parents. The tagline, "The food stick that's a meal in itself," promised convenience and health in one strange little cube. Space food sticks remained popular throughout the 1970s before eventually fading away. But for kids in the late 1960s, they represented the future of food. Funny face drinks had controversial flavors. Pillsbury's Funny Face Drink Mix was introduced in 1964 as a direct competitor to Kool-Aid, and it came in some of the weirdest flavors you've ever heard of. Each flavor was represented by a cartoon character with an appropriate name. There was Goofy Grape, Freckle-Faced Strawberry, Rootin' Tootin' Raspberry, and Loudmouth Lime. Those sound relatively normal, right? But then there were the controversial ones that Pillsbury had to change almost immediately after release. Originally, one of the flavors was called Injun Orange, complete with a cartoon Native American character. Another was called Chinese Cherry, with a stereotypical Chinese character. By 1960s standards, these names and mascots were considered acceptable, but even then, some people raised concerns about racial stereotyping. Pillsbury eventually changed Injun Orange to Jolly Ollie Orange and Chinese Cherry to Choo Choo Cherry, making the characters more generic and less offensive. But the weirdness didn't stop there. Funny face drinks were specifically marketed as being cheaper than Kool-Aid, which was a bold strategy. Instead of trying to compete on quality or taste, Pillsbury literally advertised that Funny Face was the budget option. The packages cost about half as much as Kool-Aid, making them appealing to large families or parents who wanted to save money. The drink mix itself was similar to Kool-Aid, but had a slightly different taste that some people loved and others hated. Kids tended to prefer whichever one their family bought regularly, and fierce loyalties developed. The cartoon characters on the packages were designed to appeal to children and give each flavor a distinct personality. Funny Face stayed on the market through the 1970s before eventually disappearing, unable to truly compete with Kool-Aid's dominance. Screaming Yellow Zonkers cost a fortune to make. Screaming Yellow Zonkers debuted in 1968, and while the product itself was just buttered popcorn, the packaging was absolutely insane. The box featured wild psychedelic artwork with bright colors, nonsensical text, and images that seemed designed to appeal to the counterculture movement. This wasn't your typical conservative food packaging. This was rebellious, weird, and unlike anything else on grocery store shelves. Here's the weird part. The elaborate packaging cost Lincoln Snacks Company, the maker of Screaming Yellow Zonkers, more money than the popcorn inside. The multicolored boxes with their complex printing process were expensive to produce, especially compared to the cheap ingredients that went into the actual product. But the company's philosophy was that the packaging was just as important as the food, maybe even more important. They wanted the box to be so interesting and entertaining that people would buy it just to look at it. The packaging included bizarre jokes, random facts, and rambling texts that you could read while eating the popcorn. Some boxes had short stories or comic strips printed on them. Others had games or puzzles. Each box was different, which meant kids would compare their boxes with their friends to see who got the most interesting one. It was like getting a magazine with your snack food. The name Screaming Yellow Zonkers was intentionally ridiculous and memorable. The bright yellow popcorn inside matched the loud, bold packaging, creating a complete sensory experience. Despite the high packaging costs, Screaming Yellow Zonkers became a cult favorite and remained on store shelves for decades. The product is still available today, though the packaging has been simplified significantly to reduce cost. Buckwheats. Cereal came with toy cowboys. General Mills introduced buckwheat cereal in 1966, shaped like little cowboys and frontier figures. But what made buckwheats truly weird was the extensive toy cowboy campaign that came with it. Every box included a plastic cowboy figure, and there were dozens to collect. These weren't cheap little prizes either. They were relatively detailed figures that kids actually wanted to play with. The cereal itself was wheat-based and supposedly healthier than the sugar-loaded cereals that dominated the market, but kids didn't care about nutrition. They cared about those cowboy toys. General Mills knew this and leaned into it hard, making the toys the main selling point of the cereal. The boxes featured photos of all the different cowboys you could collect, turning the cereal aisle into a toy store. Parents of the 1960s found themselves buying buckwheats not because their kids liked the taste, but because their kids needed to complete their cowboy collection. Some families ended up with multiple boxes of the same cereal in their pantry, all purchased in pursuit of specific toys. It was an early example of collectible marketing that would become standard practice for cereal companies in later decades. The weird thing about buckwheats was the disconnect between the healthy, whole wheat cereal inside and the aggressive toy marketing outside. General Mills was trying to have it both ways, appeal to parents who wanted nutritious cereal for their children, while also appealing to kids who just wanted toys. The strategy worked for a while, but buckwheats couldn't compete with sweeter cereals in the long run. The cereal disappeared from shelves in the early 1970s, but the cowboy toys remained popular playthings for years afterward. Quisp and Quake had a cereal war. In 1965, Quaker Oats did something unprecedented in the cereal industry. They introduced two competing cereals at the same time, Quisp and Quake. Quisp was a space-themed cereal with an alien mascot, while Quake was an Earth-themed cereal with a muscular minor mascot. The cereals themselves were virtually identical in taste and ingredients, but Quaker Oats marketed them as rivals and encouraged kids to choose sides. The campaign was genius because it created artificial competition between the two products. Kids would argue about whether Quisp or Quake was better, not realizing that they were basically the same cereal with different shapes and packaging. Quaker Oats ran commercials showing Quisp and Quake competing against each other in various challenges, further fueling the rivalry. It was like having a civil war in the cereal aisle, and kids loved it. In 1972, Quaker Oats took the competition to the next level by letting consumers vote on which cereals should stay on the market. This was revolutionary marketing at the time. Companies didn't usually ask customers to eliminate their own products. The vote was heavily promoted, and kids across America participated in deciding which cereal would survive. Quisp won the vote, and Quake was discontinued, though Quaker Oats brought Quake back briefly in the late 1970s with a new Western theme. What makes this even weirder is that Quisp is still available today in limited markets, making it one of the longest-running cereals in American history. Meanwhile, Quake has been mostly forgotten, except by cereal enthusiasts and advertising historians. The Quisp versus Quake campaign is now studied in marketing courses as an example of creative brand competition, proving that sometimes the best way to sell a product is to create an enemy for it to fight against. Shake-a-pudding let you make pudding in a can. One of the strangest snack innovations of the 1960s was Shake-a-Pudding, introduced by General Foods. The concept was simple but bizarre. Pudding mix and milk powder were packaged together in a can. You'd add water, shake the can vigorously for about a minute, and somehow you'd end up with pudding. No cooking, no refrigeration, no bowls or pans needed. Just shake and eat straight from the can. The physics of Shake-a-Pudding seemed almost magical to kids in the 1960s. How did shaking a can turn powder and water into creamy pudding? It felt like a science experiment that you could eat. The cans even had a built-in spoon that popped out from the top, making the entire experience self-contained. You could take a Shake-a-Pudding can in your lunchbox and make fresh pudding at school, which seemed incredibly futuristic at the time. The reality was that Shake-a-Pudding didn't taste quite as good as regular pudding made from a box, and the texture was a bit grainy. The shaking action didn't always mix everything perfectly, so you'd sometimes get clumps of powder or watery spots. But kids didn't care because the novelty factor was off the charts. Making your own pudding by shaking a can was fun, and fun was more important than perfection. General Foods offered several flavors, including chocolate, vanilla, and butterscotch. The cans were marketed as convenient snacks for kids who wanted something sweet without needing adult supervision or kitchen access. Parents appreciated that their children could make their own snacks without making a mess, though the vigorous shaking required did sometimes result in pudding explosions if the lid wasn't secure. Shake-a-Pudding didn't last long beyond the 1960s, but it represented the era's obsession with convenience and novelty. Fizzies were banned for being too dangerous. Fizzies were one of the most popular drink products of the early 1960s until the FDA stepped in and effectively killed them. These tablets dissolved in water to create instant carbonated drinks in flavors like grape, orange, cherry, and root beer. Kids loved them because they could make their own soda at home with just a glass of water and a fizzy tablet. The tablets would fizz and bubble dramatically when dropped in water, creating a show before becoming a drink. The problem was that fizzies contained cyclamate, an artificial sweetener that was later suspected of causing cancer. In 1969, the FDA banned cyclamate, and Emerson Drug Company had to completely reformulate fizzies. They tried switching to saccharin, but the new version didn't taste as good, and the fizzing action was less dramatic. Sales plummeted, and fizzies essentially disappeared from the market. But the danger of fizzies went beyond just the sweetener. Some kids would put the tablets directly in their mouths to experience the intense fizzing sensation, which could cause choking or chemical burns. There were reports of children having adverse reactions from eating fizzies tablets without water. The company put warnings on the packages, but kids being kids, many ignored them in pursuit of that intense fizzing experience. What's really weird is that several companies have attempted to bring back fizzies over the years with updated formulations that meet modern safety standards. These revival attempts have had limited success because the magic of fizzies was really tied to that specific moment in the 1960s when making your own carbonated drinks at home felt revolutionary. Without the cultural context and the original formula, fizzies became just another drink mix in a crowded market. Carnation breakfast. Bars invented a whole category. In 1969, Carnation Company introduced Carnation breakfast bars, and in doing so, they essentially invented the entire breakfast bar category that now dominates grocery store aisles. Before breakfast bars, there was no such thing as a portable, shelf-stable bar that you could eat as a meal replacement. The concept was revolutionary and tied directly to the changing American lifestyle of the late 1960s. Carnation marketed these bars as a complete breakfast for people who were too busy to sit down for a traditional meal. The original flavors were chocolate, peanut butter, and chocolate chip, and each bar was supposedly nutritionally equivalent to a breakfast of eggs, toast, and orange juice. Whether that claim was actually true is debatable, but it sold the product to time-crunched parents and teenagers who needed to eat breakfast on the go. The bars themselves had a unique texture that was part granola, part cookie, and part something else entirely. They were held together with honey and corn syrup, giving them a chewy consistency that some people loved and others found off-putting. The chocolate coating on some varieties made them feel more like candy bars than health food, which was exactly the point. Carnation wanted to create something healthy that tasted like a treat. What's weird about Carnation breakfast bars is how quickly they became accepted as a legitimate breakfast option. In previous generations, the idea of eating what was essentially a cookie for breakfast would have been scandalous. But in the late 1960s, convenience and time saving were valued above tradition. Carnation breakfast bars paved the way for the entire energy bar, protein bar, and breakfast bar industries that followed, even though they themselves were discontinued in the 1980s when competition became too fierce. Freaky's cereal had 7 different monsters. Freaky's cereal came along right at the end of the 1960s in 1969. But it deserves mention because it was one of the weirdest cereal concepts ever created. Ralston Purina developed Freaky's as a cereal with 7 different monster characters, each representing a different personality trait. The monsters lived in a magical tree called the Freaky's Tree, and each box told part of their ongoing story. This wasn't just cereal mascots appearing in commercials. This was an entire mythology printed right on the box. The 7 Freakies were named Snorkeldorf, Goody Goody, Gargle, Cow Mumble, Ham Hose, Grumble, and Boss Moss. Each character had a distinct appearance and personality, and kids could collect plastic figures of all 7 monsters as prizes in the cereal boxes. The figures were well made and became highly sought after, turning Freaky's cereal boxes into treasure hunts. What made Freaky's truly strange was how much effort Ralston Purina put into developing the world and characters. There were detailed backstories for each monster, ongoing storylines that continued across different boxes, and even plans for a Freaky's television series that never came to fruition. The company was building a universe around a breakfast cereal, which seemed excessive but captured kids' imaginations perfectly. The cereal itself was relatively standard sweetened corn and oat pieces, but nobody cared about the cereal. They cared about the Freakies. Parents would find themselves buying box after box, trying to help their children complete the monster collection. The weird, slightly grotesque character designs were unlike anything else in the cereal aisle, making Freakies stand out dramatically from competitors. Freakies didn't last long, disappearing in the mid-1970s, but the characters have maintained a cult following among cereal collectors and 1960s nostalgia enthusiasts. Whistle Pops actually worked as whistles. Whistle Pops were introduced in 1967, and they were exactly what the name suggests, lollipops that functioned as working whistles. The candy had a hole through the middle and was shaped specifically so that blowing through it would create a whistling sound. As you licked the candy, it would gradually wear down and change shape, which altered the pitch of the whistle. It was like having a musical instrument that you could eat. The concept was brilliant, but also slightly maddening for parents and teachers. Kids would walk around constantly blowing their whistle pops, creating an endless cacophony of high-pitched sounds. Classrooms banned them almost immediately, and many parents forbade their children from eating whistle pops indoors. But the restriction only made them more appealing. Kids wanted whistle pops specifically because they annoyed adults. Spangler Candy Company, the manufacturer, knew exactly what they were doing. They marketed whistle pops as fun and interactive, leaning into the noise-making aspect rather than shying away from it. The packaging showed kids happily whistling away, and the commercials emphasized the whistle feature over the candy flavor. Different colors supposedly made different sounds, though whether that was actually true or just clever marketing is unclear. What's really weird about whistle pops is that they still exist today, though they're much harder to find than they were in the 1960s. The design has changed slightly over the decades, but the core concept remains the same. They've become one of those nostalgic candies that parents remember from their own childhoods and occasionally buy for their kids, only to be reminded why they were so annoying in the first place. The cycle of whistle pop irritation continues generation after generation. Razzles started as candy and became gum. Razzles were introduced in 1966 with one of the weirdest concepts in candy history. They started as hard candy and transformed into chewing gum as you ate them. The tagline, "First it's a candy, then it's a gum," perfectly captured the confusing dual nature of the product. Kids couldn't figure out if Razzles were candy or gum, and Fleer Corporation capitalized on that confusion to create intrigue and interest. The science behind Razzles was actually pretty simple. The outer coating was hard candy that dissolved as you chewed, leaving behind a gum base that became chewable once the candy coating was gone. But to kids in the 1960s, this transformation seemed like magic. You'd pop a Razzle in your mouth expecting a normal hard candy experience, and then suddenly you'd realize you were chewing gum instead. The moment of realization was part of the appeal. Razzles came in standard fruit flavors like cherry, grape, orange, and lemon, packaged in small boxes that looked similar to other candies of the era. The pieces themselves were small and cylindrical, resembling pills more than traditional candy or gum. Kids would sometimes eat entire boxes at once, ending up with massive wads of gum in their mouths, because they forgot that each piece would turn into gum eventually. What makes Razzles truly weird is that they're still being sold today with essentially the same formula from 1966. The product has remained virtually unchanged for over 50 years, which is extremely rare in the snack food industry. Razzles occupy a unique niche as the candy that becomes gum, and apparently that niche is stable enough to keep them on shelves through multiple generations of consumers. Good and Plenty had the longest-running ad campaign. Good and Plenty candy had been around since 1893, but it was in the 1960s that the brand created one of the longest-running advertising campaigns in American history. In 1950, they introduced Choo Choo Charlie, a cartoon engineer who loved Good and Plenty candy so much that his train ran on it instead of coal. The character and jingle continued appearing in commercials through the 1960s and beyond, making Choo Choo Charlie one of the most recognizable candy mascots of all time. The jingle, "Once upon a time there was an engineer, Choo Choo Charlie was his name," became permanently embedded in the brains of children who grew up in the 1960s. Even people who didn't particularly like Good and Plenty candy could sing the entire song from memory. That's the power of sustained advertising, and Good and Plenty maintained their Choo Choo Charlie campaign with remarkable consistency. What's weird about Good and Plenty is that the candy itself is actually licorice, which is one of the most divisive flavors in the candy world. People either love licorice or hate it with a passion. There's very little middle ground. Yet Good and Plenty remained successful throughout the 1960s, despite featuring a flavor that many people actively disliked. The distinctive pink and white candy-coated licorice pieces in their unique box shape became iconic, recognizable even to people who would never dream of eating them. The connection between candy and trains in the Choo Choo Charlie campaign never really made logical sense. Why would a train run on candy? Why did Charlie need so much Good and Plenty? But kids didn't care about logic. They cared about the catchy jingle and the fun cartoon engineer. And that was enough to keep Good and Plenty relevant through changing decades and shifting candy preferences. Jiffy Pop was designed to entertain you. Jiffy Pop popcorn hit store shelves in 1959, but really took off in popularity during the 1960s, as more families got televisions and needed snacks for TV watching. What made Jiffy Pop weird and wonderful was that the packaging was part of the experience. The popcorn came in an aluminum pan with a cardboard handle and a folded aluminum lid. As you heated it on the stove, the aluminum lid would expand into a giant silver dome as the kernels popped inside. Watching the dome grow was almost as entertaining as eating the popcorn afterward. The process of making Jiffy Pop required you to constantly shake the pan back and forth over the heat to prevent burning. This shaking action, combined with watching the dome expand, turned making popcorn into a performance. Kids would gather in the kitchen to watch the Jiffy Pop grow, mesmerized by the transformation. It was interactive entertainment at a time when most food preparation was just a chore. What's really strange about Jiffy Pop is that it was marketed primarily on the experience rather than the taste of the popcorn. The commercials showed families amazed by the expanding dome, not families enjoying delicious popcorn. The product was as much fun to make as it is to eat, according to the tagline, which basically admitted that the entertainment value was equal to the nutritional value. The aluminum pan and dome concept was also wasteful by modern standards. After one use, the entire package was thrown away. But in the 1960s, convenience and novelty trumped environmental concerns. Families would buy multiple pans of Jiffy Pop, specifically because their kids wanted to watch the dome expand over and over again. The popcorn itself was fine, but the real product was the show. TV dinners had to be eaten in order. TV dinners technically started in the 1950s, but they became a staple of American homes throughout the 1960s as more mothers entered the workforce. What made TV dinners weird was the strict compartmentalized design and the fact that all the foods cooked together in one aluminum tray, which meant you had to time your eating correctly to get the right temperature for each component. The typical TV dinner had 3 compartments, one for meat, one for a starch like potatoes or rice, and one for a vegetable or dessert. All of these would heat in the oven together for the same amount of time at the same temperature, despite the fact that different foods have different ideal cooking temperatures and times. This meant that, inevitably, some parts of your TV dinner would be overcooked, while others might be slightly undercooked. The vegetables were usually mushy. The meat was often dried out, and the desserts could be scorching hot. The idea that you needed instructions on which order to eat your dinner seems absurd today. But in the 1960s, TV dinners were a new technology and people didn't know the rules yet. The weird thing is that despite their obvious shortcomings, TV dinners became wildly popular. They represented modernity, convenience, and the future. Eating a TV dinner while watching television made you feel like you were living in the space age. The aluminum trays seemed futuristic and sophisticated, even though they were just a way to package cheap processed food. The 1960s was a wild decade for snack foods, when companies would try almost anything to capture attention. Consumers craved novelty, and shifting family life, space-age excitement, and new food technology inspired some truly unusual creations. Many of these snacks vanished quickly, while others survived in new forms, but all reflected the culture of their time. These quirky treats remind us that even simple after-school snacks were shaped by the era. So the next time you spot a strange or gimmicky snack at the store, remember, it's part of a tradition that began in the 1960s.